Hello and welcome to this lecture on cost estimation. We're talking about coming up with project costs in this lecture, and there's a few things to think about. Labor, this would include skilled salaried labor as well as unskilled laborers who are going to work at an hourly rate. There's semi-skilled professionals that might be salaried or labored. But human resources are going to be included there. Materials are going to be the physical goods that are going to be consumed. This can be, if you're building a project that it is construction, it might be bricks and wood and drywall. If you're building a project that is computer software, there might not be very many materials involved at all. You have some equipment costs, but in terms of material, you're not going to consume anything, tangible materials. And there's all kinds of projects in between, from making very large airplanes to your project might be a service within the organization that's all conceptual. Subcontractors, here we're talking about hiring some expertise and some knowledge outside the organization. If you work for a company that happens to have a graphic design group within the organization, then you wouldn't need to subcontract that. You would work within that business unit within the organization, bill some time to them, and they would do your work for you. But if you're a smaller company or you're a large company that doesn't have a graphic design, you outsource your graphic design, then you could and you would have a subcontractor for doing your graphic design work. Or doing your site survey, or doing a some kind of a market analysis. A lot of the times those are core skills within the organization. You do it internally, and sometimes you contract those out. And again, just because you contract out doesn't mean it has to go overseas necessarily. You're just going to find the skilled workers outside of your organization. So that can be somebody in the same building working for a different company. It can be somebody across the street, or somebody you find in the yellow pages in your local business, your town where your business is located. It might be somebody in another part of the United States working through the internet. We're sending emails and files, and it might be somebody overseas. It's a very fluid, very competitive environment for every skill that you're doing that's outside your organization, contracting out to somebody else for that. Equipment and facilities, those are going to be project costs. Some organizations, again, have a lot of money invested in capital equipment that helps them do their job. Oil refineries have just billions of dollars invested in the machinery, and what they're doing is those kinds of businesses are very difficult for competitors to get into. If everybody in Bowling Green decided they want to start an oil, compete with Exxon, it'd be very difficult to do because we don't have the capital equipment and facilities that it takes to refine oil. Other organizations, it's very easy to get into. If you want to do the lawn mowing service as your business, then you can get into that business very easily with a very low amount of equipment and no facilities. You don't need a building for that. You can run it from your home. You just need to have the lawnmower and the weed eater and very, very small equipment costs. So it's there, maybe very close to zero. And then travel in businesses, a lot of times face-to-face is advantageous, and it's worth the cost of the organization to send a person to a location to meet face-to-face with a client or a customer. And in that case, those travel costs need to be included in the project cost as well. So there's a lot of different costs involved, and those are very broad strokes. And as we think about them, we can also break them into different types, whether it's direct or indirect, the frequency, whether it's recurring or non-recurring, the opportunity, whether it's fixed or variable, and the schedule, whether it's part of the normal schedule or whether it's expedited because we're trying to beat the original schedule, or address something where we got off the original schedule, we need to get back onto the original schedule. So let's take 4 slides here and talk about each of these 4 different types. So direct versus indirect. And I kind of went ahead and spelled this out. This is similar to what you read in your book, but different as I summarize it myself. Direct costs, those are the tangible inputs necessary to create a specific good, service, or product. It can be charged on an item-by-item basis. So we're talking about producing widgets is the classic example. We want to say producing tennis shoes, or we're producing lawnmowers. For example, the production of one item of clothing, one tennis shoe, one lawnmower, has a predetermined amount of raw material and labor necessary to make that lawnmower, tennis shoe, or item of clothing. So there's material costs, and you need more and more and more material as you make more and more scarves or coats or lawnmowers or tennis shoes. And there's the direct labor involved in taking those raw materials and assembling them in a way that produces the final good. Now again, so if you make tennis shoes, for example, if you're a Nike outlet, you're not growing the trees, you're not planting the the materials that are growing, you're not mining the rocks. If you're a builder who does bricks and lays flagstone, you're not out there digging the rock quarry making those rocks. So there is a supply chain involved in all of these organizations where you add value. You buy raw materials, and those raw materials are produced by another company that's out there doing something, and they have input where they're getting even further raw materials, and everywhere you go along the supply chain, you're adding value as you go and getting something closer. So the tennis shoe assembly might end up having the raw materials to put the shoe together, but those raw materials might include the rubber on the heels of the shoe, might include the tennis shoe, the strings that we tie the tennis shoe with, the shoe strings. It might include the material in the sole of the shoe, the kind of the foam material that gives you the padding. All those things, none of those things exist in nature, right? All of those things are produced from even lower materials by another company along the way in the assembly line. So it's a very complex issue. We say, well, why are they charging this for these tennis shoes? Why do these sneakers cost as much as they do? And a lot of it is a price that the market bears based on advertising and impression of the goods and service. But realize there's a lot of people involved and a lot of people making money on the sale of those shoes, not just Nike, not just Adidas, not just the people along the way. But got off track there. We're talking about direct and indirect costs. The direct costs are the costs that are directly related to that shoe. So there was a certain amount of cost for that shoe, the rubber, the foam, the shoestring, a certain amount of cost for that piece of clothing, the exact materials that were sewn together, for that lawnmower, the specific metal, the specific belts, the specific engine parts that were pieced together to create that particular lawnmower. Now, indirect costs, these are costs that don't change based on the number of items that we're creating. So those can come in two categories. First of all, advertising. We talked about why do shoes cost what they do. Well, part of that's because of administration and selling. And selling includes advertising. So why do shoes cost what they cost? They cost what they cost because there's an impression in the marketplace. Hey, these Nike shoes, these Nike Airs or Mike Jordan's jumping through the air, I want to pay more. I'm willing to pay more for those because those are the shoes I want. The LeBron James shoes, whatever it is. So that's a cost. But it's not tied to a specific shoe. It's an investment that the organization is making, not directly tied to a sale of a shoe, but it's made indirectly. It's made across all the shoes. And the more shoes they sell, then the price per shoe is going to drop. But it's not really associated per shoe. In fact, if you advertise and nobody buys any of your shoes, you still have to pay the advertising cost. So you don't write those off on the specific item. Shipping and sales commissions, these are indirect costs, even though they are related to the product. The shipping, although you could ship 2 or 3 or 10 with a single order, and sales commissions might actually go up or go down as you increase your volume. So the sales commission that you give to a salesperson is not a direct cost as well. But those are not associated with the production of the product. They have to do with the sale of the product or things outside of your organization's control. So even though those might be closely tied, shipping costs, if your shipping costs are going up, you're probably selling more shoes. That's not the case with advertising. One really good advertisement and you might sell a lot of shoes and it's not costing you. But if shipping costs are going up, you're probably shipping more. You're probably selling more. But it's still, the shipping cost isn't related to the production of the good or service. It's related to an indirect cost with it. And then administrative, this is just overhead. This is just the cost of being a business. All right, it costs money to start up your business. There's a one-time cost in filing your fees with the state and with the federal government. There's costs involved with whatever rent you have. If you've got something, any capital that you're purchasing, not the hourly laborers, but your support personnel, your secretarial staff, your HR people you've got to have, anything like that. None of those expenses are tied to that specific shoe, and doubling your shoe production does not double any of those costs. So that's what's going on there. And in fact, just because you double your shoe production, that'll double your direct costs, but your indirect costs, you're not necessarily shipping more. Those are not direct costs; those are indirect costs. Okay, recurring and non-recurring costs. As the name suggests, recurring costs recur or occur and occur and occur again. That would be your labor costs. As you keep producing shoes, you have to keep paying people. That's just the way it is. Probably a good thing for our economy. As you're producing shoes and lawnmowers and clothing, you have to keep buying raw materials or pre-processed materials from your supply chain so that you can put them together in a value-added way and come up with a shoe that you're ready to sell. Sales are recurring costs. You've got to market, you've got to promote, you've got to spend money on sales. That happens all the time. And logistics, just the details of the supply chain all the way in, the working, adding value within the organization, and the logistics of moving the products down to the manufacturer, to the distributor, to the customer, however it is that you're using your logics to get your product to the end user, or at least the next person along the supply chain. Now, non-recurring costs are one-time costs. Right, so if you're doing a site survey, if you're doing preliminary market analysis, personnel training are considered a one-time or a non-recurring cost, even though you may train multiple times over your career, and hopefully you'll work at an organization where training is encouraged and provided by the organization. Training is still considered to be a non-recurring cost. You don't have to do that training. It's not necessary on a recurring basis. It's a great opportunity, and you always want to take advantage of training whenever it's made available to you. And outplacement services. These would all be things that are not ongoing. As we produce another shoe, we've got to spend these costs again. Fixed versus variable costs are similar to what we were just talking about, but they have a different aspect to them. Fixed costs are not dependent on the level. So if I'm producing one shoe, or I'm producing 100 shoes, or I'm producing one lawnmower, 100, one suit, or 100 suits. They tend to be based on time, not production. So salaries, if I'm paying somebody X number of dollars a year, somebody's making $40,000 a year, that $40,000 a year has nothing to do, by doubling production doesn't change my salaries. Doubling production doesn't change the rent that I pay. Doubling production doesn't change what I'm paying for any leased equipment. So if anything's done on a monthly basis, it would be a fixed cost. Variable costs are associated with production. So doubling production will double or will increase anything that has a variable cost. The materials involved would be an example of a variable cost. Equipment that wears out over time. So if using it causes me to need to replace it sooner, that would be the case. Computers are not equipment that degrade over time. A computer in 5 years, regardless of how much I've used it, in 3 years, regardless of how much I've used it, I've gotten 3 years use out of it. It's 3 years old, and it's time to upgrade a new machine, or 4 years or 5 years, whatever the scale is for that. If I'm using a saw, then the more I use the saw, the more quickly I need to replace the blade in the saw. It does wear down. That chart on the right kind of shows the idea that the fixed costs are fixed, but as we look, variable costs, as I'm moving to the right, as I'm producing more units along the x-axis, I'm also seeing that the cost line is going up, represented by the y-axis, the dollar sign axis, and we can see that the total cost line is increasing, even though fixed costs are the same. The total costs that I'm spending are going up. Now, the good news is I've got more products to sell, so I can make more money by producing more costs. Even though the costs are going up, I can make more money that way. And then finally, normal versus expedited. The idea behind normal costs is these are what we have in our original plan, our original budget. Normal costs can include overtime pay or excessive pay, time and a half. It can include some priority spending to bring in some, consulting experts, things we can do in-house, but we're going to go ahead and double up and bring in, an extra expert consultant in this project. That's all fine if it's part of the original budget. Anything that's part of the original budget, including overtime, is normal cost. Expedited costs are unplanned costs. We didn't have these in the original budget, and either because we're falling behind schedule and we don't want to fall behind schedule, or because there's a reason to accelerate or expedite the work to get it done more quickly, there's some reason that we're using an unplanned cost to improve the speed of delivery of an aspect of this project or the entire project. That would be considered an expedited cost. So these are not ultra hard and fast breakdowns, but it gives you an idea that it's more complex. And you say, what's it cost to do X? We have to think, is this a direct or an indirect cost? And those are different things. But we can. So these are useful terms. You will hear these terms if you haven't heard them many times before. You will absolutely hear these terms when you talk about budgeting in any organization, in any environment. And we can look at things. So direct labor, this is manual direct labor associated with creating products. That would be a direct versus an indirect cost, the first two columns. Recurring versus non-recurring, that's a recurring cost. We have to pay labor, next month and the month after that and the month after that. It's a fixed cost in the sense that it's not a variable cost. It's not going up. And then it's a normal. It's in our original budget. Unless we were hiring somebody to double up the labor, that would make it an expedited. But direct labor, because that's a normal cost, and I'm assuming that was in my original budget. A lease, if I want to lease a building, that's an indirect cost. It's not directly associated with the good or service I'm creating, but it's still a recurring cost. So I have to pay it every month. It's a fixed cost, and it's a normal cost. Expedited, by definition, is an expedited cost. And again, you could probably have most expedited costs are going to be a variable non-recurring, directly associated with the product you're producing. And then finally, materials there. Materials obviously are directly related to what you're producing. They're being consumed to create that product. They are recurring because you've got to keep having those. They're variable and they are normal. Okay, cost estimation. There's 4 categories. This was a good little discussion in the book here, talking about 4 categories of cost estimating. Ballpark, or just an order of magnitude. Now, order of magnitude means to the power of 10, and plus or minus 30% is not truly to an order of magnitude. But people say, hey, just give me an order of magnitude, give me a ballpark. We use those terms to mean just a quick, rough estimate. I don't want you to spend a lot of time. I don't want you to, I'm not holding you to this, but let me know, are we even thinking about it? So if somebody said, hey, are you interested in buying these tickets to the football game? I'd say, what's the ballpark price on them? And I'm not saying you have to tell me exactly the price, but I need to know, are you planning on selling the tickets for $300 or $30? Give me a ballpark on this. That would be an order of magnitude difference. And if I'm within, if it's $300 a ticket, and then 4 tickets, I'm not interested. I'm not going to spend $1,200 to go to a game, unless it's the Redskins in the Super Bowl, in which case, I certainly have to think about it. Now, $30 a ticket, I might buy 4 tickets. $30 a ticket to see the Redskins when they're playing down in Tennessee Stadium. So, but it's just a quick, do we even want to have this conversation any further? Before I spend any more time thinking about my schedule, the dates are available, what else, do I have a doctor's appointment that day? Just real quick, what are we talking about? Oh, well then, not a chance, or let's pursue this further. If you do decide to pursue it further, you need to get a better cost estimate, so then you can do something called a comparative analysis. Comparative analysis, you're comparing it to some other projects, and the effectiveness of comparative estimates relies heavily on how true the comparison is between the previous project, where you already know the expenses and how much it cost, and this new project that you're considering. So it doesn't do any good to compare a preseason football game versus a 16th week into the season for a team trying to make a playoff run. That would not be a good comparative estimate about what you could get for your tickets on eBay or StubHub or something like that, because those are not good examples. But if you're talking about last year when the Patriots came to Tennessee, here's what the tickets sold on StubHub, and now this year, about the same time of year, looks like we're going to look at it again. That's probably a good comparative. So comparative estimates look at past data where we know the actual numbers and say, and that's likely to be a good predictor of what's going on here. Even further would be a feasibility. These are cost estimates that are based as a guidance on real numbers or figures derived after the project is gone through its preliminary phase. Okay? So comparatively, we say, okay, let's give it a go. You don't give a project a go-ahead based on a ballpark. You just pursue it further. Then you look at projects in the past. You say, this looks good. Okay, let's make a go-ahead. At that point, you go through the preliminary design work. You start looking at the activities involved. Then you can have a feasibility. And at that point, we're starting to get within 10%. We say it's going to cost $100,000 for this project. It's probably going to end up costing between $90,000 and $110,000, within 10% of our estimate at that point. And then finally definitive, once most of the design work is complete. At this point of the project, the scope is well defined and well understood. At that point we can make our definitive estimate on what the final project price is going to be. Learning curves are talked about in the chapter. Let me say something about learning curves. There's some basis for this. The idea that you get better at something over time, you develop expertise, you develop efficiencies over time, and you can do it a little more quickly. So the idea here is that they use this example. Let's assume that it took 20 hours to do something the first time. The second time you did it, it took you only 15 hours. Based on that, that was a 75%, of 0.75 was the learning rate between the first and the second instance. And the idea of a learning curve is that we're going to have a smooth, consistent curve. We're going to see a similar benefit the next time the output is doubled again. So from the first 2 to 4, as we double the output, we're going to have another benefit. So that same 75% gets applied to the new time of 15 hours, and we end up with 11.25. Now, we don't say a fixed number. We don't say we saved 5 hours from the first to the second, so we're going to save 5 hours from the second to the doubling of that, the fourth, and then 5 hours from the fourth to the doubling of that, the eighth. We don't say it that, we say it as a percentage. And when you do a percentage like this, if you're familiar with your math, you get a chart that looks like we have on the right. If I saved 5 hours every time, eventually it'd get down to 0 hours. Right? You think about that, that would make sense. By doing 75%, I keep getting smaller and smaller, but 75% of a smaller number is a smaller decrease. So I get this curved line like we see on the right there. And there's even a formula where we can take, and you don't need to memorize this formula, but I'm just putting it in there to show you how they take this example and they spell it out. Now, I'm not a big fan of learning curves because I think that unless you have a lot of experience and a lot of data points, and if you've got 8 data points, you've done this once, then twice, then 4, then 8, then 16, then 32 times, and you plot all those points, you track those times, and you fall right along a curve like this, then maybe you can make a prediction for the future. If I was the budget person, I don't like taking 1 or 2 points and saying, okay, these points are going to give me a good curve, and not only that, they're going to give me a this logarithmic curve where I can make my prediction. A lot of times you went from 10 hours to 20 hours to 15 hours on a project because you figured out one thing that saved you time, but then you're going to be 15 hours and 15 hours and 15 hours again. So they go into a lot of math on this, and I am not a person that puts a lot of stock into future projections. I would much rather be conservative and say, here's what we know. So anyways, and in fact, problems with cost estimation, it's a nice transition to this last slide here. It's always a good idea to be cautious because there are things that are going to be beyond your control. First of all, low initial estimates. Sometimes cost estimations are off because of low estimates. Now, sometimes the estimate is low because of poor planning or poor vision of what's going to happen, not thinking through all the different parts and making a mistake. Other times, a lot of times estimates are low because there's a unintended reward mechanism built into having a low bid. Once something is a low project estimate, it's much more likely to be approved, and once a project's approved and there's some sunk cost in it, you're much more likely to be able to handle, well, this is a little more expensive than we thought it was, and oh, we missed that estimate, and the actual cost can go up. It's not ethical, it's not the best thing to do, but there is almost a corporate culture that rewards underestimating, or at least when it says this range is going to be somewhere between $8 to $12 a unit, let's go on the low end for our for our initial budget, because you've got to get approval before the project can get going, and low initial estimates can help with that approval. But then, it's a double-edged sword. Once you get it approved, then you end up running over budget, and that's not a good thing. But having a successful project, even if it's over budget, is more beneficial to a project manager than not even getting to manage a project because you were too honest with your budgets up front with. So it's an issue and something to be mindful of, both as you are a project manager and as you consider and evaluate other projects. I would challenge, if I was looking to choose between 2 or 3 projects and talking to the project managers, I would say, now tell me where this budget might be a little low on the initial estimate, and what the cost might be on the the worst case scenario. These are the best case scenarios. Tell me what the worst case scenarios were, and let them know that I want to make a really informed decision, not just blindly pick the lowest offer on the table. Unexpected technical difficulties. Technology is fast changing. Therefore, it can be common to have unexpected technical difficulties that come up. And whenever I talk about technology and change, I always like to just remind you of the fact that technology is a disruptive force. It always has been, it always will. Not just computing technology, going all the way back to the wheel and the whip and fire. Technology is disruptive. And anytime there's disruption, there are winners and losers. There are people who take advantage of and advance themselves and their tribe, their group, their core, their friends because of the changes, and there are folks that are disadvantaged, folks that are losers. And you can talk about, it takes them more time to do their job, or they get less money, or they get less recognition or reward, however you want to say winners and losers. And I say those with quotes around it, and I don't say it in a derogatory way. I just say that there are people who advance and are happy with results, and there are people that are disadvantaged and are perhaps a little frustrated because of the disruptive change. But disruption results in winners and losers, and technology is a major, major disruptive factor. If you understand that technology is a major disruptive factor, then it gives you a chance to be on the winning side and not the losing side. If you misread technical trends, or if you misread market responses to technology, then you've got a good chance of being on the project loser side of that disruption. Number 3 here, our third check mark here, is lack of definition. When we think about lack of definition, what I think about is focus and direction, right? That's the opposite of lack of definition. Good focus, good direction, right? That's good leadership. That's getting everybody to row in the same direction. That's making sure everybody understands the project mission and who we are and what we do and what are our corporate goals and what are we after. And the more you get into a leadership role, the more you need to remind people who are we and what are we doing, and make sure that everybody's working together. And then within the project, say, okay, now not only are we working to put the best sneakers together, build the best lawnmower, have the best lawn mowing service in town, how are we going to do that? What are the issues involved? And if you can have good focus and good direction, then you've got a really good chance of succeeding and having direction and definition. If you don't, you have a very good chance of failing, just like with not staying abreast of technical changes. Fourth check mark, specification changes. This is sometimes called feature creep, where we're adding new features. New features get added into the product or the service that you're doing. This is always an issue with software. One of the areas that I'm more familiar with in my experience as a software engineer, that I would say, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to software do this. So, hey, it'd be great if it also did this, or what happens if we did this, or what if, hey, can you add a button to do this? Just one button. Can you add a button? Well, that's a feature that wasn't in the original specifications. That's feature creep, new functionality, change of functionality, and that is costly for a couple reasons. First of all, if the functionality was in the original specifications, the budget probably would have been higher. Second, it's actually costs more to add new features once the specifications are out there and project development has started than it does to have that feature in the original specifications, because in the original specifications it's factored in. As you add it in later, you've got to kind of work it in, and it ends up becoming extra work. So in software, we always, a lot of software companies will charge significantly for new features beyond the specifications, and they will encourage the client to spell out exactly what it is they want before the product gets created. Same thing could be going on in any project that you're working on. If you know there's something you want to do and people start having feature creep, they start trying to put new features in there, you want to discourage that. I know you want to be a good team player and all that. You say, I tell you what, let's do that. The next year, that's good for the next project. Let's get this one. Let's be successful with this project. That'll open up the door for us to do the next project, and we'll be sure to put your great idea at the very top of our list for our next project, which is a very polite way of telling somebody, no, we're not going to add your feature creep into our product right now. And then external factors. These would be things like inflation and economic issues and weather and natural disasters and any kind of disruption in the supply chain because another organization goes out of business or is having their problems, political interventions, any of these things. These are unpredictable. They're outside your organization's control. That's why they're external to your organization. Factors you can't control, you can't manage. And there's a reason that cost is an estimation rather than exact cost, because external factors and all these issues ends up giving you with an estimation of the cost rather than a guarantee of what the cost is going to be.